Starting. Okay, great. So we're live. This will be on YouTube, but we'll give everyone a couple minutes till we actually start. So be careful what you say. This is going out onto the web right now, so don't be mean to me. So Notre Dame had a couple good basketball seasons.
Oh, yeah, I know. Came so close. I was very heartbroken.
That was pretty good. That Kentucky game was crazy.
The which one? The Kentucky game?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to talk about it. Apparently he's like a cheat. I didn't know this. The coach, Calipari.
He has a long history of violations, like recruiting violations at different schools.
That's classy. It's really classy. The good news is, though, I entered my husband's office pool, bracket pool, and I won some money. So even though my team didn't go all the way, at least I got some cash.
Nice. That's what counts.
That's well, I would have much preferred Notre Dame won, but I'll take my pittance because it wasn't.
Yeah. All right, let's for joining us. Everyone for joining us tonight in our series of professional development webinar series. Tonight we'll be talking about how to write great resumes and cover letters. And I am proud to have on Claire Kittle of Talent Market. She's the executive director there. And Claire has a decade of experience in the talent development field. She's operated her own headhunting firm for more than 3 years before transitioning to a career in nonprofit space where she eventually started Talent Market, where she's connecting talent with nonprofit liberty organizations. And for everyone who doesn't know, Praxis is a 10-month entrepreneurial program for young people where we're connecting you with businesses where you're working for 10 months and you're also going through an educational curriculum. And Praxis is really about taking control of your career and life. So if you guys are interested in learning more about the program, after the webinar tonight, please check out discoverpraxis.com. And also a handout that goes along with this webinar tonight that you can find in the chat box right now. So feel free to check that out. That's from our colleague Zach Slayback, our business development director, on 10 more tips to improve your resume. So be sure to check that out. Claire, I'm going to let you.
All right. I hope you can hear me. Cameron, you kind of left me there for a second. So tell me, can you see what I see, and can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Okay, well, with that, I will get started. Thanks again, Cameron, for that. Y'all, we have only an hour total, and so my goal is to fit all of this in. I could talk about resumes and cover letters for hours, but I'm not going to do that to you. And I'm definitely going to leave time at the end for questions. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Tonight, I want to talk about how to create a fabulous resume and cover letter. And let me just give you a quick overview. First of all, I want to talk about the big picture. Then we're going to go into how to make a fantastic resume and then how to write a great cover letter. I want to give you a little heads up. This is all coming from the free market nonprofit perspective. That's the arena I work in, but it does apply across sectors. So don't feel as though you can't use this information. Regardless of the job you're interested in, it should apply. All right, so big picture. I like to think of landing a job as marketing yourself. And you should really think, do I want to be a Kia or do I want to be a Mercedes? And the point of this is that your application package, so your resume and your cover letter, should explain what you're bringing to the table. And it really should be a marketing piece about you. Another thing I'm going to harp on through this entire presentation is you really want to make it easy on employers and hiring managers when you're applying for a job. That's going to make a lot more sense as we move along. And then my last couple points are, no matter what you do when you're applying for a job, don't ever be shady. Again, I'm going to explain what I mean by this. And finally, remember that passion is key. Passion for whatever you do. I work in the free market nonprofit space, and so it's all about passion for free markets and liberty. But again, regardless of what you do, make sure that your passion for the career at hand is something that shows through in your application package. All right, so with that, let's talk a little bit about the resume basics. You have about 10 seconds, and I actually heard not too long ago that this is down to 8 seconds now. So employers literally spend 8 to 10 seconds looking at your application package. And if they don't like it, they're going to hit delete. So it's really got to be good, and it's got to be somewhat brief. Which brings me to my second point. Keep it to one page. Unless you guys have a PhD or you've published a lot, you really want to keep your resume to one page. Again, as you get up there in experience, or if you get an advanced degree, you might want to take it to 2 pages. But honestly, I think 1 page, even if you have an incredibly long career, I think 1 page can often be much, much stronger. So it's all about quality, not quantity. You always want a very clean, easy to read format. Again, this makes it easy on employers. They can quickly find the information they want to. Have a friend of yours review your resume. If you're not sure if your resume is clean and easy to read, have an honest friend of yours check it and see what they say, and ask them, is it clear to you what I've done, my career progression, do you understand the different jobs I've had? And if they're not sure, you probably want to tweak your resume. Last word on clean formatting, I definitely suggest you save your resume as a PDF versus a Word. Often Word documents sort of get funky formatting when you email them, especially when you're going from different platforms, a Mac to a PC, etc. So, and especially if you're talking about a handheld device, PDFs are so much easier to read. And then, sweet mother of pearl, please check your spelling and your grammar. By far, the #1 reason that candidates I work with are rejected by my clients is spelling and grammatical mistakes in their resume and on their cover letter. And what's so sad is that could be prevented, right? It's not that clients are necessarily saying the experience isn't what I want. They're saying, I'm interested in this candidate other than the fact that they have 3 grammatical mistakes in the cover letter and I'm not interested. Or they spelled their own university wrong. I'm not interested. So make sure you check spelling, make sure you check grammar in your resume and on your cover letter. All right, so one of the most common questions I get is, what do I put in my resume? So here's a pretty concise list. You definitely want contact information. You definitely want your education and your experience. And then I think the last 3 sections here are optional. Civic participation or community involvement, special skills, and publications. We're going to walk through each of these sections right now. All right, first, contact information. This is pretty straightforward. You want to have your name, your email address, your phone number. I would say almost everybody sends me those things in the resume. But one of the things I'm not seeing as much now as I used to is city and state. And I think that's because a lot of people don't want you to know where they live because they want to relocate, or maybe they're interested in living in different areas, and so they want to seem flexible, and to an employer, they want to seem open-minded. But I really think you need to include it. Employers are going to wonder where you live if you don't tell them, and they're going to assume you're local if you're applying for a local job and your resume doesn't state where you live. And you're really going to be in trouble if they call you up and say, can you come in tomorrow for an interview? And you say, I actually live across the country and I can't make it in for a couple days. So you want to avoid that, and my advice is definitely include that. I may get some questions later about what do you do if you want to relocate to a specific city. Can I include the address of, say, a friend? If the friend told me I could sleep on their couch for a few weeks, that's a common question I get. And I definitely think there are ways you can be creative, but we can talk about that later if you want. Okay, now let's talk about education. Obviously, you want to include your university or college if you've gone to it, or fantastic educational programs like Praxis if you're going to attend. I don't recommend a high school unless you went to some fancy high school and you think that's going to be a key for networking, but honestly, it's something I probably would leave off. Definitely include your degree and your major. Please include your graduation year. A lot of people want to leave this off for two reasons. They either want to appear older than they are, or they want to appear younger than they are. At the end of the day, people are going to want to know not necessarily your age, they're going to want to know how much experience you have. And when you leave the year off of your resume, it's really hard to know. Only include your GPA if it's good. And again, the older you get, you might want to ditch that unless it's a 4.0 or something fancy, then maybe leave it on there. Include the city and state of your university. That might sound kind of silly, but I went to a university that actually has Notre Dame. Go Irish. I don't want to talk about basketball season. Anyway, I think there are like 5 or 6 Notre Dames across the country. There's only one University of Notre Dame, but there's like a Notre Dame College and maybe a Notre Dame University, which is not the same as the University of Notre Dame. Anyway, so include the city and state so you don't confuse people. And then include other highlights like special awards, scholarships, if you were student body president, that sort of thing. Include that as well. Okay, let's move on to experience. Obviously, you want to include your employer, which is going to be the organization or company. Please include your title. A lot of people leave this off a resume, and the reason they do is they don't want you to know they were an intern, right? Well, there's nothing wrong with being an intern, so I definitely think you should put the title on there. And if you had a sexier title other than intern, if they gave you a maybe an alternate title, then use that one instead. But you don't want to be misleading, so definitely include your title. Include the city and state of the organization you worked for. And for the love of Pete, include your dates of employment, right? I recommend you include the month and the year. You don't have to get down to the specific day, but something like June 2008 to present is perfectly fine. And make sure you explain overlap in jobs. So if you've got 2 jobs that you did concurrently, explain, was one of them part-time? Was one of them a consulting agreement that you did kind of on the side in your own time? If you don't explain that, then the assumption is those jobs were full-time, and then people are going to wonder, how did this person hold 2 full-time jobs concurrently? You know, were they a vampire? Did they not sleep? I don't understand how this works. So make sure you explain that sort of thing. And then under each job, you want to have a brief bulleted list of what you did, your accomplishments. I strongly suggest you start with very sexy verbs. Don't do rambling paragraphs, just kind of hit the high points. And then when possible, quantify your success. If you are responsible for a 100% increase in sales, say that. You know, use numbers when you can. I think that's especially challenging when you're starting your career. And it's frankly especially challenging if you work in a career that's not easily quantifiable. For instance, the nonprofit world, it's incredibly difficult to quantify success. But when you can, I definitely recommend doing that. And then make the most important, which are usually the most recent, though not always, jobs longer to denote that they're the most important ones, right? So if you have a job 3 jobs ago that takes up half your resume, and then your most recent jobs are just sort of little blips, you may not be highlighting the things you want to highlight. However, if the job you had 3 jobs ago was the most important job, then it's okay to make that section longer. Okay, and then finally, don't make freelance or part-time positions seem full-time or permanent. I get this a lot, especially with people who are in between jobs and they've been a consultant and maybe they've been, you know, working just a few hours here and there, but they want to make it seem as though they've been working full-time. The problem there is when employers start asking questions, or when folks like me start asking questions, and then it turns out instead of a full-time job, you were working 3 hours a month for your best friend, it doesn't look so good. And again, the hiring manager feels as though maybe they were misled. You don't want to do that. So just be honest about freelance or part-time positions. You don't necessarily have to advertise how many hours you worked, but just call it consulting, freelance, or part-time, and that should get the point across. Okay, now on to these optional sections. If you want to have a civic participation or a community involvement section or something, you know, titled similarly, feel free to make up something better than that. These are the sorts of things I think you can include. Volunteer activities, political participation, group membership. These are the kinds of things you want to include, especially if you are applying for a job in which these activities would be relevant. In the world I live in, they're very relevant. A lot of the groups I work with would love to see, somebody who's worked on Ron or Rand Paul's campaign, right? So those are the kind of things you want to throw in there. For other people, depending on the job they're going after, that's not relevant. And of course, in some cases, it can work against you. So think about that before you put it on there. Might be something you want to include, might not be. All right, special skills. These are the sorts of skills I'm thinking about. There are probably some other ones that aren't listed, but again, if these things are relevant to the job you're applying for, make sure they're on there. And we'll talk more about that sort of thing in the future. And then publications. This is a difficult one because if you include it on your resume, you're almost surely going to extend that resume beyond one page. So feel free to put something like publications available upon request, or make an addendum to your resume that you send along depending on the job you're applying for. All right, so almost as important as what to include in your resume is what to exclude from your resume. So I have a short list of things I think you shouldn't put on your resume, and here they are. The objective, high school information, qualifications and accomplishments, personal information, and irrelevant college and or part-time work. Let's walk through each of these briefly. The objective. I'm going to make you two promises about the resume objective. One, no one's ever landed a job because they had a super sexy objective, but a lot of people have not landed the job. And why is that? Because it overwhelmingly works against people. It's really an engraved invitation to make a mistake, right? And as I like to say, I just think it's superfluous doo-doo. I think this is the sort of information you want to put in your cover letter. How often have I seen a resume with an objective that says, my goal is to work for such and such widget factory, only they've sent it to me for a job that isn't with such and such widget factory, right? You see the problem? So don't include it in your resume. All right, qualifications and accomplishments. What do I mean by that? There's this newfangled resume I see a lot now where people break out their qualifications and accomplishments and they sort of put them at the top of their resume, and then they put their work experience below that. My frustration with that is you don't want to list your accomplishments separately, right? That information needs to be in more logical sections. For instance, if you have some amazing education qualifications or accomplishments, you want to put those things under the education section, right? And if you have some amazing work qualifications or accomplishments, you want to put that under experience. When you separate those accomplishments and qualifications out, it doesn't provide any context to the employer and they get confused. And remember what I said at the beginning, you want to make it easy on the employer. If you make their life more difficult when you're applying for a job, they're not going to want to hire you, right? They want you to make their life easier, and it starts with the job application. So I wouldn't use qualifications and accomplishments. Personal information. I got to tell you guys, I get a lot of this stuff. I get a lot of resumes, and I see some really interesting personal information. But this is the kind of thing I don't think you need to have on your resume for many reasons. Now, I have to share some of my favorites just for your entertainment, and we'll be brief. I saw this one on a resume and I thought that is really fun, but I don't know how it's relevant to anything I'm hiring for. This one I thought was just kind of like quirky and cute. Again, not super relevant. This one, I was single when I got this resume, and I remember thinking, wow, I probably would like to go on a date with this guy, but I don't want to hire him for the job. It's not really helpful. This was funny. When I was planning my wedding, I would have loved to have called this person. I'm glad that you can do calligraphy. Again, not super relevant. And this, I think, was my absolute all-time favorite. So this guy discovered a criminal on his farm, which is very cool. It's awesome dinner party conversation, but not relevant to your resume. All right, so let's talk a little bit about formatting. I think I've made this clear at this point, but you want it to be very clean, very easy to read. You want to go in reverse chronological order. Leave tables in the kitchen. What do I mean by that? Those little formatting boxes that people often use in resumes. I get more complaints from clients about tables on resumes. It's really strange. They irritate me, but I didn't think they irritated everybody. Apparently they do. So don't use those. Don't include photos. I'm sure you guys are all beautiful, but a lot of my clients sort of laugh and say, why would that person include a photograph? Wait to impress everybody in person when you walk in. No need to include a photograph. I don't think you should use color. I just go with black and white. If you really want to use one color, then make it a very, very, very subdued color. But I think black and white is going to be your strongest way to go. Quick caveat. If you're applying for a job in the advertising world, this is not what you should do. You should have your resume printed on like a cereal box and do something super creative and fun. But for most of us outside of the marketing and advertising world, we want to go with a more standard resume. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there. I used to work in the advertising field, and I can tell you everything I'm telling you now is garbage if you want to go work for an advertising agency. But other than that, it definitely applies. And then I strongly suggest one typeface, and preferably all in one size. I see a lot of people who like to use a bunch of different cute fonts, cute typefaces. They like to have their name really big. This isn't necessary. I think simple is better. Keep it simple, stupid, kiss, right? I think that's great advice, especially for the resume. And just a quick word about tailoring. A lot of people ask me, should I tailor my resume for the job, depending on the job I'm applying for? And my comment or my response would be this: make sure that your resume contains all of the relevant experience, if you have it, obviously, that the person is requesting in the job. So if you read a job description and it says, we want X, Y, and Z, and you have experience X, Y, and Z, make sure your resume includes all of that and articulately explains it. So often I will reach out to a candidate and say, I really like your background, but unfortunately my client wants somebody with X experience. And they say, oh, I have that. I just didn't put it on my resume. And I think to myself, why would you not put that on the resume if you're applying for this particular job where we made it very clear we want that experience? I could have been somebody who was less patient. I could have hit delete and it all would have been over. So don't even allow that to be a chance, right? Go ahead and include everything that's relevant on your resume the first time. Make sure you highlight your transferable skills, especially if you're going to change sectors. And remember, at the end of the day, your experience is your experience, and there's only so much tweaking you can do. If you are going to make a career transition, then use the cover letter to explain the transition and how your background will translate. For instance, if you have been doing sales and you want to get into fundraising, those are very transferable skills. So explain in the cover letter, I've been doing sales, but here's how I think this is going to apply. I've built relationships with customers. I've, understood their needs. I've helped meet their needs, et cetera, et cetera. So with all of that, let me show you what I think a good looking resume looks like. Now, obviously I've sort of made this one generic, but you can see very quickly that if I'm a hiring manager, I know exactly who this person is, where they went to school, what they studied, what they've done, where they've worked. I know their title, I know how long they were there, and I know exactly what they got done in each job. And literally in 10 seconds, I can have a decent sense of this person. Obviously, if I'm interested in 10 seconds, I'm going to spend a lot longer taking a look at the resume, but it is clean, it is easy to read, and I know exactly what I'm getting. Even with just a quick glance. So that's the sort of resume you want to shoot for. All right, let's move along to cover letter. So here's some basics. Make sure the first paragraph counts, right? If you say something that's not especially appealing, you risk the hiring manager hitting delete, so you want to be careful about that. Again, I recommend one page. I think you can be a little bit flexible on this. If you've got a lot to say, I think a page and a half might be fine. I would be really careful going beyond 1.5 or 2 pages. I've had some candidates do that, and the client reaction I get is almost universally negative. What is that old adage? If I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. That's exactly how my clients feel. They feel like you should take your time, say it concisely, edit, and make it brief. So 1 page if you can. The worst thing you can do, especially in the sector I work in, but honestly, I bet it applies across the board. It certainly applied in the last sector that I did headhunting in. But you definitely don't want to have a generic cover letter. It is absolutely bad news. The hiring manager is going to think you don't care. They're going to think you're just blindly sending out resumes and cover letters, and that's not the impression you want to give. If you do a little bit of research and you explain your passion for the job at hand in your cover letter, that's all you need to have a fantastic cover letter. There's no magic to it, truly. Those are the two things you need to include. And then I keep beating this dead horse, but you want to have spectacular spelling and you want to have perfect grammar. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what to include specifically. Obviously, you want to mention the job for which you're applying. Sometimes organizations have multiple openings, so it's not enough to say, dear so-and-so, I'm interested in the job at your organization, because they might be thinking, which one, right? So especially if you're going through a human resources department, or if you're going to the president or the executive director, chances are they may be hiring for more than one position at any given time. Explain how you heard about the job. This is a great time to name drop. If somebody that you know who knows the organization well told you about the opening, say that. It's never going to hurt you, hopefully, unless there's some kind of bad relationship there, and presumably there's not. Then mention how you heard about the job. I think name dropping, let's face it, that's code for networking, right? And that's a good way to maybe get your foot in the door. And if you didn't hear it from a specific person, maybe you just saw an ad or saw a link on Facebook, that's fine too. Mention it though, because I think hiring managers care about how you came to them. Not only do they care about you and where you came from, but they're also curious to know what marketing efforts they're engaging in are actually working. Again, explain why you want the job, right? You want to tell the hiring manager that you're very passionate about the job. And then explain why you're a good fit. Tell them why your experience matches the job requirements. It's just as easy as that. Now, let's talk about what you don't want to put in your cover letter. You don't want to have the John Gruden rundown of your resume, right? You don't want to explain everything that the hiring manager already sees in your resume, right? They can see that over here. Now they want to read something a little bit different. And if you make them read the same thing twice, they're going to look at that as a waste of their time. You don't want to tell them why you're not a fit, but they should hire you anyway. This is actually something I see relatively often. You want to be a little more nuanced than that. If for whatever reason you're a creative candidate and you don't sort of fill the bill perfectly, I wouldn't explain it in this way. I wouldn't say, well, here's why I'm not a fit, but you should hire me anyway. You want to talk about transferable skills, right? And certainly don't tell them about your interest in the wrong job. I have been so excited looking at resumes, and then I get to the cover letter and there they are telling me they're interested in a job that I'm not even hiring for. So it might seem like a minor little mistake in Word, you weren't paying attention, but I have a devil of a time explaining that to my client and getting my client to be as open-minded as I am. So make sure you check those sorts of things. The other thing I would suggest is do not include phrases like this in your cover letter. And I actually get these relatively frequently. I think they show a little bit of hubris and a lack of humility. And that's another thing that I think my clients complain about religiously. And that is, we don't want to hire somebody who's arrogant, right? We want to hire somebody with the humility to come in and say, I want to learn. And so if you're already the perfect candidate for this role, and the other thing about that is, how do you know you're the perfect candidate for the role? I'm the one looking at applications and I'm telling you, you're probably not the perfect candidate for this role. And then I have to share this illustration of a long-winded description of your absolute perfection. This is real. I got this on a cover letter, and everything you're about to read, it's real. And I did not add the underlining and the bolding. That actually came from the candidate. I'm going to give you a second and let you read that. It's quite entertaining. So you get the point, right? This person is basically perfect, which is nice, but I'm going to have a hard time getting my clients to take someone like this seriously. So embrace humility when you pen your cover letter, and I think it's going to pay off for you. All right, some other things worth noting. You want to give hiring managers exactly what they ask for, nothing more, nothing less, right? So let's say they ask you for salary information. Let's say they ask for writing samples. Let's say they ask you to give them some times that you can be reached via phone. give them all of those things, right? Give them exactly what they've requested. Don't send a bazillion attachments. Let me walk you through an example of what I mean by that. I always ask for a resume, a cover letter, and then whatever else the client asks for. Sometimes they ask for, writing sample or something else, a creative sample, let's say. And what will happen is sometimes candidates will email me and they'll send the resume. And then 5 minutes later, they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot to include my cover letter. Here's my cover letter. And then 5 minutes later, they'll send me another email saying, oh, I'm so sorry, I forgot. Here's my writing sample. So now I have 3 emails in my inbox from the same person. And at this point, I want to start drinking because it's just a little overwhelming. So here's what you do if you forget to include something. You send one more email, not 5 more. You send one more email and you say, I'm so sorry, please disregard my first email. Here is one email with everything requested included. And that way the person can delete your first email and move on to the second one. That's a very professional way to handle it. No one's going to be mad at you that you forgot the first time. Everybody makes mistakes, but you don't want to make their lives really, really complicated by sending multiple emails and a bazillion attachments. Don't send unrequested letters of recommendation. I get this one a lot, especially from people who've done things like work on the Hill, and there's a senator or representative who's willing to write them a really nice letter of recommendation on the fancy letterhead. Unfortunately, I think that looks bad. Definitely, I've heard clients complain about that. It's also the sort of thing that you want to kind of save in your back pocket. If you become a finalist for the role, organizations are probably going to ask for references, and that's when you want to be able to come out and say, oh yes, in fact, Senator blah-bitty-blah has this letter of recommendation for me. So that's when you want to pull that out. I don't ever suggest including it at the very beginning because in my experience, it's worked against candidates more than it's worked for candidates. And I think the bottom line on that is you don't want to look desperate, right? It's just like dating. I'm always comparing interviewing to dating. Whatever you do, you don't want to look desperate. A few other things to note. Don't be evasive on salary questions. If you are hunting for a job, I promise you somebody along the way is going to ask you, where are you now in terms of salary, or where do you want to be, or both, right? Some organizations are even going to ask for a salary history. My personal opinion is that's a little bit too much. Again, it's like a first date thing. You don't want to start asking for a blood sample on the first date. I don't think you should ask for a salary history. Some of my clients demand it. But I usually just say, tell me where you want to be financially, right? Simple enough. But it always raises a red flag when you ask a candidate, where do you want to be in terms of salary, and they're unwilling to talk about it. They're unwilling to tell you where they are. They're unwilling to tell you where they want to be. And my thought is always, A, what are you hiding? And B, are you not looking for a job? Because if you're looking for a job, you got to talk about money. And a lot of people will say, well, I don't want to talk about salary until later in the process. Well, that's fine. And maybe that's not what the candidate wants to do. But at the end of the day, the employer is in charge. And if the employer wants to know where you want to be in terms of salary in the cover letter, very first thing, or if they want to know in the first interview, or if they want to know in the 8th interview, that's their prerogative to ask. So I strongly suggest you just tell them up front. It's a lot less painful than you think it might be, I promise. Some other things to think about in terms of applying for a job. Remember that persistence is good. I think if you apply for a job, you should absolutely follow up, especially if you're very interested in the organization and you haven't heard back after a few days. What's not okay is being pushy. Again, let's compare this to dating. If you happen to call somebody after a date and maybe you don't hear back from them, if you're really interested and you want to call maybe one more time, that's okay. But you don't want to continue following up after that because they probably didn't lose their phone, right? It's probably just not a love connection. But whatever you do, you don't want to be pushy. And then don't apply for not qualified, right? There's a difference between being on a slightly different page and then not being in the same library. You don't want to waste an employer's time if you're absolutely not qualified for the job. Now, one of the questions I get when I talk about things like this is, well, Claire, what if I am really interested in the organization, but all they're hiring for is a senior level position and I'm more mid-level, or maybe I'm junior level? And here's what I suggest. feel free to send your resume to the organization, but I wouldn't apply for a job that you're totally not qualified for. What I would do is send a general cover letter and say, you know, hi, this is what I'm interested in doing. I'm very interested in your organization. If you have a job that comes open in the coming months that looks like this, I would be really interested in applying. And there's just no harm in doing that. In fact, a lot of hiring managers are going to be impressed that you took it upon yourself to proactively send an application like that, even though they're not hiring. So I think that sends all the right signals, as opposed to applying for a job that you're absolutely not qualified for, which sends the wrong signals. It makes people wonder, what is this person thinking? I tend to work on very senior level roles in the with the work I do now, and so I'll often work on positions that are asking for 10, 20 years of experience, and I will sometimes get applications from people who aren't even graduated from college yet. And I just think it's a little bizarre, right? And I try not to hold it against the candidates, but it's strange. You wonder, why are they not picking up on the clues that were so clearly outlined in the job description? So anyway, that's just something to think about. You can still get your foot in the door, but I don't think you should apply for a job unless you're pretty darn near qualified. And then remember that your application materials should never, ever exaggerate, falsify, manipulate, or mislead. I think you probably know what I mean by that, but that's the quickest way to end the job search, right? You could be in the middle of an interview, and if an organization finds out that you exaggerated something on your cover letter, or you manipulated something, certainly if you falsified something, you're toast. It's over. So I recommend you don't do that. And in fact, I recommend you avoid it like the plague. Which brings me to my next point. You always want to be honest. Be honest about job changes, about salary history, and about the skills you're bringing to the table. I've seen all of these things sort of blow up in candidates' faces when they're not honest. I mean, I've seen candidates who sort of fibbed a little bit on salary history, and organizations find out and they say, wow, if this person isn't going to be honest with me during the interview process, you know, how can I trust them once I hire them? So be very, very truthful about all of those things. And at the end of the day, if the organization doesn't want to hire you, then I say good riddance, right? Move along and go with an organization that does want you on staff, but you shouldn't have to lie to get the job. Remember to be a long-term thinker. Your reputation is absolutely everything. Obviously, that's tied into the last couple points I've made, but I can't tell you how much I've seen in the work I do, people's hard work and effort from an internship that they had during college pay off years later. Literally, like 10 years later, it still counts, because people will say, I remember that guy. He interviewed, or he interned with me, you know, back in 2003. And oh my gosh, he was really, really solid. And I can't even imagine how talented he is now. So don't slack off. And remember, your reputation truly is everything. And you're in this for the long haul, right? So be thinking about performance, even if it's just an internship. And lastly, I know you guys are probably all headed in varying directions, but if anybody is interested in the free market nonprofit sector, that's my niche. Feel free to send me your resume. I would love to be connected with you guys. So with that, I would love to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thanks, Claire. Just a couple things before we get to Q&A. Remember again, I sent the link in the chat box if you want to receive that handout that follows this webinar as well. And again, go to discoverpraxis.com to check out the program more if you're interested in taking 10 months to work with some pretty cool entrepreneurs and kind of discover what makes you come alive. Also, you can email me at Cameron@discoverpraxis.com, which is also in the chat box if you'd like to talk about the program more. So Claire, we have a couple questions for you.
Sure.
First one, how do you recommend that the currently employed keep their resumes and their application skills sharp?
You know, one thing I do, and I have no interest in leaving my job, but I do this on a somewhat regular basis. I'll just pull out my resume and I'll update it. And that way I'm challenging myself to think about, what have I learned? What have I experienced? What have I accomplished since the last time I dusted this thing off, you know, a year ago or 2 years ago? And I think in doing that, you're not going to forget something. And by the way, do it probably more often than once a year, although that's probably all I've ever done it. But maybe every 6 months. That will ensure that you have included all of your accomplishments on your resume and you won't miss something. In terms of keeping skills sharp, gosh, I guess it depends on what you're doing. Let's say you're in fundraising. Continue to take fundraising classes, right? Challenge yourself to learn, read. Those are the sorts of things that might be helpful. Continuing education of any kind. It really just depends on the sector you're in. But I really think the thing that my clients tend to look for is the experience, or it's the things you've accomplished on the job. This is a bit of a tangent, but I think it's directly related to the question. I think it takes some time to create a portfolio of success in a job. And I know nowadays we tend to change jobs a little more rapidly than we did, 10 years ago. And so the average tenure for a millennial, I think, is, depending on which study you look at, it's somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. It's hard in 18 months or 2 years to really experience a lot of success and to create a lot of value for a company. And so I think one of the best things you can do is actually stick around in a job if it's the sort of opportunity that will allow you the opportunity to build things and to create value. Stick around, build something amazing, and then sell that to your next prospective employer. I've had a lot of clients say to me, this person's worked at a lot of great shops and it seems like they've had some good jobs, but they've been at every job for like a year. So I don't really have any evidence that they've built anything, that they've been successful. I just have this evidence that they switch jobs frequently. So anyway, my biggest bit of advice would probably be stick with a job, build a portfolio of success, and then sell that.
Gotcha. Great. And another one, any thoughts on how first-time or young employees can, one, determine the right salaries to ask for, and two, gain the guts and tact to negotiate with more experienced managers?
Oh, I love this question. And in fact, I give a presentation on salary negotiations and I love it. If you want to have me back for that, I'd love to do it because I'm a capitalist pig and I love to talk about money. I just read, and I'm trying to remember where I read this, Forbes, I think it was, that the average starting salary for folks coming out of college was like $39,000 and some change. I can't remember exactly. So that's a good little data point for any of you who are coming out of college. How can you find the guts to negotiate salary? So again, I have so much to say on this. I'll hit a couple high points. Probably the biggest thing you can do is negotiate negotiate in reality, meaning do your homework before you ask for a raise. Do your homework before asking, before putting a specific salary amount in a cover letter. Make sure you understand what somebody with your background is worth roughly. And I know that's easier said than done. Depends on how much experience you have. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on if you're changing sectors. But the point is, do as much homework as you can so that you can speak with confidence when you say, this is where I am, this is where I want to be. Now, if you don't have a salary history, right, if you're just coming out of college or if this is your first job, well, it's hard to sort of puff out your chest and say, this is the salary I want to make, darn it, because you don't have that salary history to lean on. It will get easier with the more experience you have. But again, I cannot underscore enough how you want to be based in reality. I have story after story after story about candidates I've talked to who've said, hey, Claire, I want to be at 50 grand. And I'll look at the resume and I'll think, this is really more like a 40 grand kind of candidate. And I'll say to the candidate, why do you want to be at 50? And they'll say something like, because my best friend told me that's what I should ask for. Oh, that's really not a good reason, right? You should spend some time online. There's some great salary calculators out there. Talk to your friends, talk to hiring managers. If you spend even just a little bit of time on Google, you can probably find more information that will make you confident when you come with a salary request. So again, a lot more to say on that. Those are the high points. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, based on my experience, that's definitely something that I think worries a lot of young people. Like they don't know what to do going into it. It's a very, very interesting topic. Anyway, another one.
Yes.
What's been the most, and based on your experience, what's been the most impressive or just something that makes people stand out with their resumes outside of kind of what you covered today, or even just open it up to more broadly the application process? Is there anything that's been unique that's made them stand out to you?
I love that question. I would say, and I didn't mention this, so I'm so glad this person asked the question because this definitely stands out. The cover letters that stand out the most to me are the ones that tell a story. Now, I don't mean like once upon a time or it was a dark and stormy night. I mean, they tell you a story about their life, their interests, and it all centers around why they want to work for the organization that's hiring, right? Now, again, because I work in the liberty movement, it's really easy for people, presumably, to tell that story, right? I read Ayn Rand and everything changed, and they can build some great stories around those sorts of things. It's harder, I think, when you're talking about a job in a widget factory. That's maybe a little bit more difficult to weave an interesting narrative about. But if you can do it, do it. And if you can do it well, I think people are going to pay attention to your resume. Perhaps more broadly speaking, if I enjoy reading the cover letter, which I'm not going to lie to you, that's rare. If I enjoy it, the candidate is already about 10 steps ahead of every other candidate, because usually I sort of have to, suffer through it because it's, not the best thing ever. So if you're a great writer, and heaven forbid if you're a great storyteller, you're probably going to be ahead of the game. What else has stood out to me? Let me cogitate on that one. And let me say one other thing. I want to come back to the salary question just briefly.
Sure.
One of the things you can do if you're not sure is ask for a range. And if you're really not sure, ask for a broad range, right? Now, this is a little more difficult to do when you're on the younger end, when you're somewhat green. You probably don't want to ask for a salary somewhere between 35 and 65 because it sounds a little, weird. But if you're not sure, maybe you ask for a salary range that, there's $5,000 in there. There's even $10,000. I'm looking for a salary in the 40 to 50K range, depending on specifics. You don't have to marry yourself to one number, right? In the cover letter or even in a conversation, you can absolutely just say, I'm looking for something in the 45 to 50K range, depending. And then if you find out later that this job isn't going to pay expenses and they're going to expect you to pick up on that, or there's going to be some travel that won't be reimbursed, don't hesitate to adjust that salary. Now, you have to be careful doing that, but nobody's going to look out for you except for you. So anyway, that's just 2 more cents on salary, is ask for a range if that makes you feel more comfortable. Cameron, I'm sorry. What else do you have?
No problem. We have a couple more to finish up.
Okay.
So we have one question from Frederick here. I'm graduating with an English degree this summer. I've worked in retail throughout college. Are there any jobs I shouldn't apply for?
Neuroscience jobs? No. Okay. So if there's a job that requires a very specific skill set, a chemical engineering job or something like that, then obviously maybe not. But I was just having this discussion with some friends of mine, and we were talking about how little it matters what you actually study in college. Do you know what I studied in college, y'all? I studied art, not English, which, by the way, in retrospect, I should have studied English. So I'm really sort of jealous that you studied English. But art, and somebody chose to employ me. Are you kidding me? So, but the point is, it doesn't really matter, I think, especially if you're going to go into a liberal arts field, sort of broadly speaking. Most people really don't care. Again, if you're an engineer, if you're a scientist, if you're a doctor, okay, maybe these things matter, and surely there are other sectors where it matters. But for the most part, there's a big swath of jobs out there that it really doesn't matter what you studied at all. So frankly, English is going to work for you because you know why? You can string together sentences and you're not going to commit grammatical sins. And that is something people are looking for now. They want good writers. So I think you're ahead of the game.
Claire, a couple quick follow-ups on this question. If you're a young person and you're applying for positions that you don't feel like really connect with your education or your work experience up to this point, what should you do to either articulate and really think about how they connect, or maybe go out there and get the experience that makes you more comfortable applying for that type of position?
That is a great job, and it's a great question. And let me say that it's hard to answer that kind of question in the abstract, but I'm going to answer it with a specific example. So again, I work in the liberty movement, and there are a lot of employers that I work with who really, really value somebody who has some experience on their resume doing something for liberty. So I get this question a lot. Claire, what can I do to make myself relevant to these organizations? How can I sort of tell them I'm interested? How can I demonstrate that I'm committed to the cause? And I always say you can participate in something like an Institute for Humane Studies seminar. If you don't know what that is, Google it. They're the best thing ever. But if you do something like that, then you're spending a few days of your life on a college campus with some brilliant people learning an amazing amount. And now you've got something to put on your resume that clearly demonstrates I'm interested, I'm committed. So depending on the job you want to apply for, you can think about what you might be able to do that's not going to put you in the poorhouse and that's not going to take up, years and years of your life, that will demonstrate you're interested and will demonstrate you're maybe starting to build the skill set you need to make that jump. So again, I know that's one specific example. It's hard to answer in the abstract and give you something that would apply across sectors, but hopefully that gives you a little seed to think about what you might be able to do for other jobs.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. Claire, any final thoughts on people, especially young employees coming out of college looking to get connected with some pretty cool jobs, how they can do that with their resumes?
I think, I guess one of my last thoughts would be put together a beautiful resume, clean, tight, simple, no misspellings. If you can weave a story in that cover letter, fantastic. And if you do that, I really do think you're going to be ahead of the game, because you're going to be up against a lot of other applicants who haven't put that kind of time and effort in. Quick side story. I got an application, this must have been yesterday, from a relatively senior person in the free market world, very accomplished. The resume looked like a fiery train wreck. There were all sorts of colors going on, and there were all these crazy little boxes with these decorative frames and different typefaces. And I was getting a headache just looking at the resume. And I had to stop myself because I wanted to call the person and have a resume intervention. And I wanted to say, you can't send this stuff out there. It looks bad. And again, it's not that I necessarily think it looks bad, although I thought it looked bad. It's that I get so many complaints from my clients when they see a resume that looks like a fiery train wreck. So anyway, don't do that, right? If you put together a very clean, tight resume with no crazy formatting stuff going on and no colors and da-da-da-da, then people are going to be drawn to your experience. They're also going to think that you've thought through it, you've put some time and effort into it. And I really think that's the best thing you can do, combined with what we were just talking about, which is make yourself relevant as you can. And your goal is to just get your foot in the door, right? It's not to win the job by sending in the application. You just want to get your foot in the door. If you are going to be, if you can put together an application package that is impressive enough to get you an interview, then you just need to rock that interview. How many times have I seen a handful of candidates go into the final interview process with my clients, and the candidate that looked best on paper ends up in last place because they couldn't interview well, or maybe at the end of the day they had too much cockiness, right? They didn't have the humility the client wanted, et cetera, et cetera. So put together a strong enough presentation to get your foot in the door, rock the interview, and then you'll live happily ever after.
All right, Claire, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for everyone for joining us as well. If you guys are looking for more resources and information on professional development and through the world of entrepreneurship, be sure to check out our blog at discoverpraxis.com, and also be on the lookout on Twitter and Facebook. Our Twitter handle is #discoverpraxis, and you can find us on Facebook as well. We'll continue this series on a monthly basis going forward. Thanks so much, Claire.
Thanks, guys.